Hey everybody, it's Brian Shannon from Alphatrends.net. Today is Friday, the 22nd of October, 2021. The markets are basically at an all-time high. Hope your account is as well. We had good strength in the market as far as the major indexes go. Oil down just a little bit, as were bonds and the volatility index. The S&P 500, you can see on a weekly chart, we closed at an all-time high. On the daily, we were down slightly from yesterday's record close, but still clearly very bullish here. Once the buyers regained control last week, getting back above that volume weighted average price from the peak, it's been up and away. We did break beyond the prior peak, and as we often see, when we break to a new all-time high and the market's a little bit extended, it's an excuse to take a little bit of profit. So for people who've been expecting and anticipating that, so we're still obviously in a very healthy uptrend. Here's our rising 5-day moving average. This is our week-to-date volume weighted average price. Above 450-ish, I think you still give the benefit of the doubt to the buyers in the intermediate term. NASDAQ was down slightly here today. This is what I had drawn in, thinking that what I'd like to see in the NASDAQ would maybe be a pullback down to test that 50-day moving average, and that 20-day moving average will be coming up to meet it as well. We'll see if that happens, but we closed pretty much right on the 5-day moving average today. The volume weighted average price from this gap is actually what I had pointed out on Twitter this week was we had come down right to the volume weighted average price for the week here on Wednesday and bounced perfectly from there. Now we're kind of back to that, just below it. So it looks like maybe the NASDAQ needs a little bit further consolidation. I think you want to keep an eye certainly on the volume weighted average price from the low that would bring it down if it were to fall that far. I don't think it would, but 365-ish. I think what we really want to see is this prior little band of resistance near 366 to hold up. That's even a little bit aggressive to the downside. I'd prefer we hold around that 50-day moving average, but we're still clearly quite bullish for the NASDAQ. The Russell 2000, I've been calling it a waste of time because it has been a waste of time pretty much this entire year because we've been in this range, and I'm starting to get a little bit more bullish on it. I have some exposure on the long side to the Russell 2000. It's a little bit disappointing that it's not following through beyond this trend line here. And if it does, though, next week, we could see a quick move towards the top end of this range. A lot of it, of course, is going to depend on earnings. As we've seen, earnings are going both directions. IBM reported terrible response to that. Intel, the old school, names are getting beat up pretty bad, as did actually a newer one, Snap, as well, and that weighed on Facebook. And of course, this week we saw PayPal with their announcement for a merger wasn't very well received, and that stock was already below a declining 50-day moving average, and just gave an excuse to sell off harder from there. The Intel, as I mentioned, we've had this phenomenal bull market in the semiconductors. This is a semiconductor index, and then if you look at the same thing, the weekly for Intel, it's done pretty much nothing. I mean, talk about an underperformer here. It's just yesterday's news. So, not all semis trade the same. Focus on the ones that are doing well, or focus on the index, because there's definitely been an opportunity to make money with a trend like this. Anyways, back to the daily time frame. We held the 50-day moving average on a gap lower on Thursday. Buyers came in quickly there, and we're still above the rising 5-day moving average. So we're switching to a 30-minute time frame. Let's just clean this up. I think the volume weighted average price from this gap is something we want to keep an eye on next week. That comes in at about 265. That's almost precisely where we saw the low on Thursday as well. But you've got to be impressed. The buyers are clearly in control. Now, are we going to be in for a little bit longer period of consolidation after this little move? We'll see. But you still got to give the benefit of the doubt to the buyers for the average semiconductor stock. The Biotechs, these guys are just kind of dead in here. They've been, floundering near this year-to-date volume-weighted average price and the declining 20-day moving average, declining 50-day moving average. I honestly don't see an edge in there. Maybe if you're a longer-term accumulator, who's not concerned about momentum, you buy in here, but that's not how I view the market. So zero interest there for me. Financials continue to run up to new all-time highs, so that's a good sign. They've had their earnings out of the way, so that's a good response to them. And energy names are holding on to their gains really well also. Some of the stocks that I'll be keeping an eye on next week, I'm in this OGN. That's a one that's doing well. Dan, I got stopped out of today. DV is one for next week. Here's the volume weighted average price from the IPO, and you can see that's just building nicely, hopefully for a push higher into next week. EXPI is another one, and be aware of all all these stocks and when their earnings are due out. It was interesting to see also this week that BITO, the first Bitcoin ETF, came out, and initially the response was strong, and you can see that after 2 days the average participant was making money in there. But now the volume weighted average price for the BITO is 41.80. That means that the average participant in this IPO, in the BITO fund, is down, $3 or so in here. So, not the best response in terms of a closing price on the week, but it doesn't affect the bigger trend that we see, of course, on Bitcoin itself. Here we can see this is the daily time frame, and I've got a couple volume weighted average price levels. I'm thinking maybe an undercut of 60,000 would be a place to look to make some dip purchases in there. And I only buy dips in Bitcoin because it comes down so hard that sometimes that it typically bounces back, but it's not a strategy. It's not definitely not the same strategy I use for individual stocks. On individual stocks, I'm more interested in buying strength or selling weakness, like in OZON. This is one that I've been kind of picking on all year. It's in a downtrend, lower highs and lower lows. Sellers are back in control in there, as they are actually when you look at all the things I talk about for volume weighted average price levels on the upside. You can kind of flip it around to the downside as well. Here was an important low back in September. Perhaps that gets tested if we look at Sonos on a shorter term time frame and say who has control since this low. Well, the sellers retook that control. So if Sonos does something like this next week, then I think you could see it drop back down towards that volume weighted average price under that 30 level. Earnings aren't due there for till November 17th. Anyways, there's some great pockets of strength as well. Of course, Tesla, you can see here, all-time closing high, as is, I don't know if it was an all-time closing high, but certainly very strong in NVIDIA. So, just be aware of the earnings reports next week. We have a lot of them, and stay true to the trend. Thanks for tuning in.